Good morning. My name is Matthew Stromberg with the Folston Siefkin Law Firm. I serve as chair of the Olathe Chamber's Legislative Committee, and it's my honor to moderate today's forum featuring the candidates for Kansas Senate District 9, which includes a portion of Olathe, including the northern border of K-10 to the southern border of 183rd, and west of I-35 and east of 2400th Road. It also includes portions of DeSoto and Gardner. On behalf of the Johnson County Public Policy Council, a collaboration of all 10 local chambers of commerce, and in particular, on behalf of the Olathe and Gardner Edgerton chambers, I'd like to welcome everyone. Joining me are Stacy Nell, the Democratic candidate, and Beverly Gossage, the Republican candidate, who are running in an open seat contest following the retirement of Senator Julia Lynn. You can read about their backgrounds and experience at our Public Policy Council's website, www.votejoco.com. Also joining me today as a timekeeper is Natalie Bright, who handles governmental affairs for the Olathe Chamber. I'll briefly share the format for our forum, which will include 2-minute opening statements by the candidates, a moderated question and answer period during which the candidates will each have a minute and a half to respond to each question. At the end, there'll be a 1-minute closing statement by each of the candidates. Today's questions, which focus on business issues, were developed by the Public Policy Council. Due to time constraints, there will be no follow-up questions, formal rebuttal time, or viewer participation, so the webinar's question and answer and chat functions have been disabled. Candidate speaking order was randomly determined in advance with the candidates and will rotate throughout the program. Now let's begin our opening statements. As a reminder, the candidates have 2 minutes each to present their opening statements. I'll ask Stacy to start for us.
Thank you. Well, good morning. I want to definitely thank the local chambers of commerce for this opportunity to come on and have this forum to address and speak to the voters directly. So my name is Stacy Nell, and I think of myself as a Midwest gal. My family's roots in Kansas go back several generations. I was actually born in Nebraska, but raised in Iowa. My family, who has history in Wyandotte County, moved back to the Kansas City area when I was in high school, where I graduated from the Sumner Academy in Arts and Science. I went on to attend the University of Iowa and got a BA in art history. Then I moved to St. Louis, where I also got a degree in deaf communications or sign language. It was that degree that brought me back to the Kansas City area, where I became a sign language interpreter at Blue Springs South High School. I worked there for several years and then became aware of a program sponsored through KU in coordination with the KCK school system, where if people agreed to teach for a certain number of years, they would pay for the teaching certificate. I went through that program and became a math teacher, first at a high school in KCK, and then I spent the duration of the remainder of the time in a middle school in Kansas City, Kansas, teaching math to 6th graders. So I always say my spot in heaven is guaranteed. But then I started having children, and it was one of those situations where my children were born close enough together that we made the decision. It was more of an economic decision for me to stay home and raise the children, which is what I've been doing since then. That giving me a little more wiggle room has allowed me the opportunity to become a precinct captain for the Democratic Party, and that was sort of where I got my feet wet politically. And then that's what sort of led me on this road to run for this office. Outside of in my free time, I've been active in the arts community here in Johnson County. I've sung with the William Baker Festival Singers for over a decade. And I even had a starring turn and a production in The Wiz at the Theater in the Park a couple of years ago. So being active in the arts community is fun for me. I'm active in my church as a part of the worship team. And in the past, I've also been a teen counselor there in my church. So my husband and I love living in Olathe, and I look forward to serving this area in the next legislative session. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll turn to Beverly for her opening statement.
Well, hi, everyone, and thank you so much for this opportunity to our local chambers. And just briefly, my background is education. I taught elementary school, raised our 4 children. During the time when I was raising our children, you know, as a mother, you try to do things that make sure that you have time to put the children at the forefront. So while I was raising our 4 children, as they were getting older, especially when they were small, I became a real estate agent so that I could work in the evening and during the weekends, and my husband could be with the children during that time, to his chagrin, but it worked out just fine. And when they started going back to school, I went back to teaching. But I noticed pretty quickly that my youngest of our 4 children was severely dyslexic, so I homeschooled my son. And I understand what parents are going through right now. Those are attempting that. Um, as my son got a little bit older, I began to realize that one of my callings was to try to help other people's children that were struggling, like my son Adam. So my master's program is in reading and special education. So I became a director of the Lawrence Sylvan Learning Center, and then went on to become district manager for the Sylvan Learning Centers for both Kansas and Missouri. And then later, when my mom and dad own Castle Plumbing in Lawrence. I'm from a blue collar family, native born in Kansas, very proud of that. First one on either side of my family to ever go to college. In fact, my mother got her GED when I was a junior in high school. And what I appreciate about that is that they worked hard and they brought themselves up on their own. And mom called me one day, you know how moms can be, and she said, hey, I made you some navy beans and cornbread. And oh, by the way, here's all of our insurance stuff. And so I was asked if I could help with the family's insurance. And sure enough, that became a new mission for me. And I started doing research on insurance and thought somebody needs to do something about this. Started helping my family's company with their insurance, which led to helping many other companies around the United States. I'm licensed in 50 states. So not only businesses, but individuals, families, and seniors find affordable coverage. But very quickly, I began to realize that a lot of the laws that were coming out of DC, Topeka, Jefferson City, and elsewhere meant to help people were actually hurting people when it came to their health insurance and access to medical care. So that's when I began to testify. So I've testified not only in DC to committee, also advised to presidents, but have served on, I helped create health savings accounts and pioneer those. So it just became natural to start to help our legislators understand why we needed free market solutions instead of more government interference.
Thank you, Beverly. Next, we're going to proceed to the question and answer portion of this forum. As a reminder, the candidates will have 1.5 minutes each to respond, and the speaking order will rotate with each question. We'll be starting our first question with Beverly.
All
Beverly,
right.
as a candidate, what are your top 3 policy issues?
Okay. Well, first of all, let me just say my campaign is 3 weeks old. Some of you may know that our Senator Julia Lynn was forced to remove herself from the ballot, and she's a caretaker for her sister whose illness had become worse than what she anticipated. So the way the law reads is the precinct committee people, of which I am one, met together to elect a new person to take her place on the ballot. So it's my honor to have been elected to do that. I do not come in with preconceived notions nor an agenda, but I can tell you when it comes to business that helping businesses and the economy bounce back is a #1 goal for me. Helping businesses all over the country with their health insurances, I have seen them struggle. My family's company for the first time has had to lay off employees in 46 years. I'm also making sure that affordable health insurance options are available to people, help write a mandate light bill, help testify on short-term medical plans to give people broader options, and then of course transparency in government. But finally, balancing the budget in a methodical way without raising taxes. We all know that there's a budget deficit due to what's been going on with COVID.
Thank you. Stacy, going ahead and kicking the same question over to you. As a candidate, what are your top 3 policy issues?
Thanks. So I mentioned my background working in the public education system. And so I think one of our top priorities in talking to people on the campaign trail is to make sure that the public schools are completely funded and supported and keeping them strong. Secondly, I think it's time that we pass Medicaid expansion here in Kansas. If we can remember back to January of this year, which seems like it was like 8 years ago by now, but there was actually a compromise between the Democratic governor and the Republican Jim Benning to show that, you know, it was really encouraging to see that there could be bipartisan work done to get an idea passed. And 22 of the 40 senators co-sponsored a bill for Medicaid expansion. which also shows that there is a political will in the Senate to get Medicaid expansion passed. So I think it's, with the right mix of people, we can work together across the aisle and come to a similar compromise in the next legislative session to make sure that that gets passed to help people here in Kansas. And then lastly, I've taken it upon myself over this past year to learn about the foster care system in Kansas. I've talked to different agencies, even some private groups, to talk about how the foster care system is handled. There are several thousand children who are in the foster care system, and I feel like it's one of those situations where if there were a few more legislators with eyes on the system, that the recommendations, there was a task force that happened a couple of years ago and came up with recommendations, but with a few more legislators with eyes on the system, we could really start to right that ship.
Thank you. We're going to move on to question 2, and Stacy will lead us off. How would you propose to balance the state budget? What specific budget cuts would you support? And what revenue enhancements would you consider, if any?
So that's a nice, easy softball question to start off with, right? I think there's no two ways around it. Coming out of COVID and coronavirus, we know we are facing a budget shortfall that is hasn't been seen since the tax experiment that we recovered from previously. I think without knowing any specifics of the budget, and indeed in 6 months from now, who knows what we're going to be facing, it's difficult to comment on the specifics of how we would balance the budget, but I can speak to some ideas for revenue questions. I would be in favor of looking at legalized medical marijuana. I know that's an idea that was introduced this year. I have a dear friend of mine who lives on the Missouri side, in fact, it's the woman who does my hair, who has a seizure disorder, and over the last couple of years, I've talked to her a lot about the benefits that she has seen with medicinal marijuana, and I think that that's an opportunity that does help people who are in that position, and it could be a source of revenue for the state. In terms of tax cuts, however, I am in favor of reducing and possibly eliminating the sales tax on food, the grocery food sales tax here in Kansas. So I think that's a tax cut that I can definitely get behind, as we all have to buy food, and sales tax on food would be considered a regressive tax that has a greater burden on people who are in lower income. So in terms of tax cuts, I'd be in favor of getting rid of the food sales tax. In terms of tax revenue, I think it's time that we look at legalized medicinal marijuana.
Thank you. Going to Beverly now, the same question. How would you propose to balance the state budget? What specific budget cuts would you support? And what revenue enhancements would you consider, if any?
Good question. Well, the state actually has not produced a true balanced budget in many years, because budgets are balanced by shifting dollars from agencies, programs, and delaying payments to other programs such as CAPERS. But borrowing from Peter to pay Paul is not balancing the budget. So I would suggest that we look at the budget line by line and assess if our dollars are spent wisely and where cuts could be made. The governor appointed me to the Kansas Board of Indigent Defense Services, where we reviewed the budget annually. But we do need to consider a zero-based budgeting approach. And what I like about that is more of a business approach, where all the managers are required to justify all budgeted expenses, not just the changes in the budget of the previous year. The baseline would not be last year's budget, but zero. And this would protect taxpayers, local governments from runaway spending and take the politics out of the process. I agree. I have a son who's a CPA, and he and his wife, she's a surgical oncologist at Mayo Clinic in Scottsdale, tell us all the time, like, I still don't understand why there's certain foods in Kansas that they tax. I agree with that. That's definitely a tax cut that I would agree to. But I also think that we have had for some time a spending problem in Kansas that we really need to review. Definitely do not want to raise taxes on hardworking Kansans.
Thank you. Moving on to question number 3, and this will be directed at you first, Beverly. What would you do to grow and develop the state's workforce?
That's a really good question. As far as I'm concerned, the state workforce, it honestly starts with education. I know I'm a former teacher, but that's where it begins, and affordable, flexible pathways for student success. In my family, there are 5 of us. I was the first one to go to college. I had one sister that followed me. She is an accountant and graduated from Baker. She became the mayor of Baldwin City. But I have three other family members that chose to go directly into business. Both of my brothers helped my parents when they were 14 and 18 with Castle Plumbing and had done extremely well. I don't believe everyone should go to college, but they should definitely have a career path. So we should include a partnership with industry and business that actually starts with middle school. In fact, when I taught sixth graders, we would have career day, a career day for an hour every Friday afternoon, and bring in different careers for them to get an idea. Kids need a goal, even if they change that goal. Maybe today they think they want to be a firefighter, but tomorrow they may decide they want to be a mechanical engineer. But they should have career awareness and ensure basic skills are solid. And then career readiness honestly begins in early childhood and culminates directly with seamless graduation from high school, then college or a career. But definitely kids need to have a career path. That's the best way for us to have our state's workforce and to keep kids in Kansas.
Thank you. Stacy, what would you do to grow and develop the state's workforce?
I also agree that that does start with education, primarily making sure that there's healthy conversations between the school systems, the K-12 school systems, the colleges or junior colleges or trade schools, and then the environment of the business community to make sure that we're actually helping to raise a workforce that's prepared for the jobs that will be available to them when they graduate from either high school or college. I honestly, I agree with very much of what she said in terms of making sure that there's opportunities and people know the opportunities. I think we can go a long way to support STEM business and just encourage the colleges and universities, but definitely to have that conversation to make sure that we are training the people for the jobs that they will have when they get out of school. I think another thing that would help people decide to stay in the Kansas area as children are graduating from high school and colleges is to make sure that we have an environment here that's inclusive and welcoming. I think part of that, we talked about lowering the grocery food sales tax. If people feel like that they can live here and afford to raise a family here, that's helpful. I think, just making sure that we have an inclusive and a diverse environment of, I know with the non-discrimination acts that people feel like that Kansas is a place where they want to stay, where they feel like they would be comfortable raising their family. I mean, I know for me, that's why we are here, because we love being here. So I think that would go a long way to help raising up the workforce and having it grow.
Thank you. And we're going to move on now. Stacy, you're up again. This one's a question that's kind of near and dear to my heart with 4 boys going to school. What are your views on K-12 education funding?
Yes, and as a background with as a teacher and as a support staff, as being a sign language interpreter, and then with my 2 girls, I have a 4th grader and a 6th grader. We're currently doing online. I even heard them one open the door, and I'm like, no, we're doing online right now. I think it's imperative that we make sure that we have a strong education system. Supporting the education system here in the state really is going to be the backbone of growing even the economy as businesses want to locate here and people want to live here. Primarily people don't want to live in District 9 because of, the parks. We have great parks. People want to live in District 9 because it's the quality of the education system here. People talk about that's what property values are driven by, the strength of the schools. And so I think it's imperative that we make sure that we continue to fund the schools and keep them strong. And I think there's looking at education specifically, making sure that we fully fund with special needs and special education, and then just giving the schools what they need to thrive, right? As I said, both as a teacher and as a sign language interpreter, so I've been in sort of 2 different roles to see the need to make sure that the schools are strong. And I tell you right now, at the doors, when I ask people what's important to you, people time and time again are saying schools, right? That's the thing that people are saying is most important to them. I think now with the pandemic, with so many people doing online schooling or homeschooling their children now for the first time, we are even more so seeing the importance of having a strong school system, public school.
Thank you, Stacy. Same question to Beverly. What are your views on K-12 education funding?
Well, as a former elementary classroom educator, I know the struggles of teachers that are trying to stretch supplies for their students, but I also saw the waste in top-heavy salaries and administration. It seemed like each year there would be another assistant superintendent of something. And I questioned how the funds were being used and if the taxpayer investment from the budget translated actually to improvements in student outcomes. I know that recently the Senate voted to end the decades-long litigation in the courts by passing the $1.5 billion in funding to our schools, and I'm hopeful that our school boards will be held accountable for how those precious taxpayer dollars are used. Will be targeted to the classroom, teachers, and actual education. That's my hope, and not used to build layers of administrative positions. I too, as I've been going door to door, parents have been talking to me, but mostly saying things like, oh, you homeschooled your son, can you get in here and homeschool mine? I'm also hearing things like, how in the world are we going to get back to school? How can we get back to normal? Children need to be in school. I need to go back to work. That is the number one priority that I'm hearing at the door.
Thank you. The next question, we'll begin with Beverly, and you guys have both touched on this a little bit in some of your prior answers, but the question is, what types of economic development policies will you support to encourage job growth and business expansion in Kansas?
I'm glad to hear you say that. Economic development is not more government regulations. Sadly, so oftentimes when you have legislators, they only think in terms of government fixes for things. What law can we write? How can we make this happen? Sometimes it's about laws you undo, but it should begin with stable, predictable, simple tax policy. Because if you're going to have economic development that's going to benefit both small and large businesses and families, you cannot have higher taxes, uncertainty, because that just will create population loss, like we talked about before. It should ensure that communities have security, stability to grow, to have access to their needed services, so that you'll have more businesses who want to come there to offer medical care or food, affordable housing, jobs, education. So whatever economic development that we work on, it should not be government-based, but it should be a free market-based, and it should be transparent and very easy to understand.
Thank you. Stacy, same question to you. What types of economic development policies will you support to encourage job growth and business expansion in Kansas?
Right. I think, like I said, we did touch on this before. I think one, making sure that there's a strong public school system and Medicaid expansion are two things that I think would be a backbone part of economic growth in the area. Something that's a little stray from that is I think we could look at STAR bonds again as a way to spur economic growth. Now, having said that, I know that not all STAR bonds are created equal. And that's something that should not just be, relied upon over and over again. But I think with the judicious use of them, implementing good accountability and oversight, that STAR bonds are a way to help have very specific developments that would spur economic growth in the area.
Thank you, Stacy. The next question, you'll be leading us off. What are your views on state tax policy, being as specific as you can?
Right. The state tax policy coming out of the Brown Bag tax experiment sort of wreaked havoc. And I know that one of the things it did was reduce the number of tax brackets that are available for taxing. So I think that that's one thing we can start with is expanding the number of tax brackets. I think in terms of tax policy, we already talked about reducing the grocery food sales tax. And then to revisit that tax policy to make sure that the people who are most able to pay tax, that the upper incomes of tax actually do pay their fair share by closing some of those loopholes so that the tax burden is not unduly falling on the lower tax brackets.
Thank you. Beverly, same question. What are your views on state tax policy, being as specific as you can?
Sure. Well, actually, I really like this past session. The Senate passed a very fair and transparent policy that addressed the tax burden on Kansas, but unfortunately it was vetoed. I will say that we need to return Kansas back to returning Kansas away from a high tax environment. I'm disappointed that our governor chose to keep those tax breaks that were supposed to come back to us under the Trump administration, and those should have come directly to Kansans. But today, we've got the pandemic. It's even more vital to keep taxes down, or at least steady, for all Kansans. And I can tell you as senator, I will pursue every avenue for a fair tax policy rather than raising taxes on hardworking Kansas and families, as I mentioned before. And I think it's important too that when we see an issue that we think in terms of how do we need to cut back on what we're offering now compared to we need to keep everything we have now and just raise taxes to pay for it. Always, that's how you look at your family budget. That's how you look at your business budget. And that's how we should look at the state budget.
Thank you. Beverly, the next question begins with you. What are your views on healthcare policy?
Well, as you know, or as I mentioned earlier, that is my forte. And I've spent the last 17 years finding health insurance coverage, as I mentioned, that fits Kansans budgets. But our goal should be to ensure that all Kansans have access to an affordable, private, portable, personalized health insurance plan where they only pay for features that they want and need. I testified in DC and in Topeka on bills that would remove barriers to this goal. Medicaid should be preserved for those for whom it was intended, the disabled, the low-income seniors, families, pregnant women, and children. And Kansas should not be forced to go off of their private plans onto Medicaid. You know, the problem with what people don't understand about Medicaid expansion, there's a lot of misunderstanding about it. And they think, oh, it's going to help more low-income families. No, it's designed, Medicaid expansion, for those low-income, able-bodied Kansans, single people. So these are people that fall between making no money at all to about $12,500, which is, no, it's actually $12,700 coming up on this year for the poverty level. Those folks currently that make at least $12,700 up to $1,700 or $17,000, I'm sorry, $12,500, $17,000. They already receive an extremely low premium, $0 to maybe $25. They have no cost for a doctor's visit, no cost for generic drugs. Many of them have $0 deductible or $250 deductible. I know because I write these plans every day and help people with these plans. Those folks, it's about 30,000 people, would be forced to go off of these private plans that they like and forced into Medicaid if we were to expand Medicaid. So we're taking people off of private plans with an employer, private plans for, let's say, an individual policy that they selected that they like, and now they're competing to try to find a doctor that will even offer Medicaid services. Many doctors do not. So they're now forcing those folks that are currently on Medicaid, trying to find a doctor, forcing them to make it even more difficult for them to do so. Medicaid expansion is not the right way for our state, but we do need to talk with our federal government and work together on coming up with affordable policies, much like what we had before.
Stacy, same question to you. What are your views on healthcare policy?
I do believe that Medicaid expansion is a way forward for our state. Like I referenced earlier, even at the beginning of this year, there was a compromise where over half the Senate co-sponsored a bill to get Medicaid expansion passed in Kansas. So I think that does speak to the idea that there is a political will to get Medicaid expansion passed. Even in Missouri, they took it to the people. It was a ballot initiative and it passed. I think Medicaid expansion, yes, it primarily is aimed at people who are between 0 and 138% of the poverty line. And I think, you know, I struggle because I feel like there's two ways to look at this. One, we can look at it from the economic standpoint way. You know, so if we're talking about, you know, helping people in the community, if they have access to healthcare, then people will be more likely to get healthcare when things are not a large problem. So if a person gets sick and they can get to a doctor before they're presenting in the emergency room, then that person can continue to go to work. That person can continue to be a contributing member of society. They're no longer, you know, waiting to go to the emergency room to get care. It is an economic stimulus thing. I mean, there are hospitals in rural Kansas that are closing for lack of uncompensated care. So Medicaid expansion is something that it will benefit the state. It will benefit people who need it, and quite frankly, it's the right thing to do. Even morally, in the midst of a global pandemic, this idea that there are a lot of people who are losing their jobs, there are a lot more people who are going to find themselves within that 138% of the poverty line, and to not expand Medicaid in a global pandemic, I think is just it needs to happen. I think it speaks to our priorities.
Thank you. All right, this is going to be the last question for the day, and Stacy, you'll lead us off. What do you believe most distinguishes you from your opponent in this race?
You know, I this is the first time I've met Miss Gossage. I'm grateful to actually say hello to her. I think one of the things that most distinguishes me is that Kansas has what's supposed to be a citizen legislator. I know that myself, I'm a stay-at-home mom, right? I teach yoga and I sing a little on the side. And so I think that the idea that I have the ability to run for this seat brings a new perspective. It's a different perspective. It's a different life history. It's a different way of approaching solving problems that I think would be definitely helpful in the Kansas State Senate. As a person who primarily is a stay-at-home mom who teaches yoga, my business interests, my personal interests are not something that are going to be impacted by my activities in the State House. So I think I come in with a sort of a freedom of being able to address problems from a standpoint of how does this most impact District 9 rather than how does this most impact perhaps my bottom line. So I think that just gives me a freedom to approach things with new set of eyes, with a new perspective, and to have a different voice in the state legislature. I definitely look forward to serving District 9 next session. It's been a fantastic opportunity meeting people at the doors and talking to people who agree with me and who don't agree with me. And I think it's time. I think it's time just to have a new set of eyes in District 9.
Thank you. I'll pose the same question to Beverly. What do you believe most distinguishes you from your opponent in this race?
Well, as Stacy said, it's the first time we're meeting each other, and I appreciate this opportunity. I would say it's probably the fact that I'm a strong supporter of principles of limited government, individual liberty, free enterprise, traditional values, and my experiences that I mentioned before set me apart. Also, the fact that I have had an opportunity to research various topics, everything from education through healthcare and health insurance reform. And as such, I'm aware that if you look at the state expanded Medicaid, they have had budget overruns. Their rural hospitals were not saved. The closure was the same rate as other states who had not expanded Medicaid. And what we need to do to help able-bodied folks that are between 0 and 100% of the poverty level, because remember those at 100 to 138% of the poverty level already have access to very low-priced health insurance. It's only those from 0 to 100, and those from 0 to 100 just really need a job. You know, they have to work at least 30 hours a week, making minimum wage. That's about $12,500 a year. So we have to help the economy to get people back to work. That's the number one thing that we can do. So problem solving, I think, is what sets me apart. I've had the experience, and I can be a representative who walks into the Capitol prepared on day one. It's a familiar environment to me. Been there testifying as a concerned citizen many times, and I'm ready to roll up my sleeves and work for you.
Thank you. Now we'll move to the closing statements. As a reminder, candidates will have 1 minute each to present a closing statement given in the reverse order of the opening statement. So Beverly, you'll lead us off on your closing statement.
All right. Well, first of all, I again want to thank the chambers for this opportunity to speak directly to the voters. It's been my pleasure to go door to door every day since I accepted this and was elected to this position, to meet with folks, and they're just regular folks, you know, like you and me, and they're just trying to live their lives, and by and large would like government to stay out of their way, be able to run their business, be able to go to work, be able to raise their children, and not see so much of their paycheck being caught up in taxes. You know, as a mother of 4 children, as a business owner, and from a family of small business owners who started in a 2-bedroom house, I was raised with 7 of us, 5 children in a little 2-bedroom home. My dad always worked 3 jobs, you know, selling potholders when I was 8 years old, to pay my own way, paid for my own college, paid for my own wedding, went through 3 years of college because I knew I had to get 4 years in a 3-year period. So I need to get out and start making a living. Ground up, boots on the ground, personal responsibility, working together. When I helped with the HSA bill, that was a bipartisan effort. We can definitely work together, reach across the aisle. I know it's never been more divided. there are certainly things that we can do together, and we need to base all of that on facts and not a lobbyist coming into us and convincing us we should do it this way. Our lobbyists are people that you should listen to and realize they are recognizing and they are representing their particular industry, which is great, but at least take that into account, but always look at what's best for Kansans.
Thank you,
Look forward to your vote. And again, thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Beverly. Stacy?
Yes, I also want to join with Ms. Gossage in thanking the Chambers for this opportunity to come and address voters directly. If someone had told me even 18 months ago that I would be sitting here right now at this stage, this close to an election for running for the state Senate seat, I would not have believed them. I have not lived my life necessarily with political aspirations, but as this opportunity crossed my path in a very real way, I am more than happy to take on this challenge. And I believe that I am the person to be able to best represent this district. As a person of faith, it's been my prayer throughout this entire campaign that I would have the opportunity to legislate from a standpoint of compassion and also working from a standpoint of cooperation with the other side. So I look forward to taking that outlook. I look forward to taking that approach to government with me to Topeka in the next session as I serve District 9. So you can learn more about me at staceynell.com, STACEYKNOELL.com, or follow me on Facebook at Stacey Nell. For Kansas, thank you again for this opportunity today.
Thank you. That concludes our forum for Senate District 9, featuring candidates Beverly Gossage and Stacey Nell. On behalf of the Olathe and Gardner-Edgerton Chambers of Commerce and the entire Johnson County Public Policy Council, thank you for participating in today's program and providing voters with this important information to hear from you. This forum has been recorded and will be posted on the Public Policy Council's public nonpartisan voter website, www.votejoco.com, where you can find more information about candidates, videos of other candidate forums, and advanced voting details. Let me close by reminding viewers of a few key dates. Advanced voting by mail began on Wednesday, October 4th. It will begin on October 14th. Advanced voting in person begins Saturday, October 17th. Primary election day is November 3rd. Election day is November 3rd. Polls will be open from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. Again, thank you for joining us today. Hope you have a good day and a great weekend. We are officially adjourned.